So this is always a fascinating moral question, and it's something we haven't really ever been able to figure out as a society in the post-colonial era. You see, prior to colonialism, there was an idea that certain peoples were superior. That is, certain peoples were smarter, they had agency, they were able to be moral actors, they were able to think long term, they were able to delay gratification, they were able to control their impulses. Specifically, the groups normally are like Europeans and East Asians are normally thought of as being these groups. And then there are people who just by nature aren't very bright. They have very high time preference. They have very low social trust. They don't really have impulse control. They don't really have moral agency. And it's kind of the duty of the people with more agency to save or take care of or guide the people with less agency into the light, as it were, and to kind of treat them like children and to be like, well, you can't expect them to be held to the same standards as everybody else. You can't expect them to be responsible for their actions. And kind of post colonialism, you kind of have this really weird double narrative where you have this idea, oh, these people are all equal to you, but they have no agency. And this is, if you look at anything that's happened in Africa in the last 60 years, be it the first and second Congo War, the Rwandan genocide, the Angola Civil War, anything to do with Gaddafi, all this stuff. If you look at the narrative, particularly from someone like Noam Chomsky, and the same thing goes for Latin America and the Middle East, the idea is none of these countries have any agency. All of these countries only do what white people or Asians tell them to do. The Rwandans just decided to kill each other because white people decided to tell them to kill one another. And I remember when I was in university, and I'm like, so you're saying that the Rwandan people are children with no moral agency? And they didn't know how to react to that. I'm like, okay, so a white person told them to do something. Like, people tell you to do stuff all the time. You're the person with the marijuana flag who talks about how society is unjust and how we need social justice. So people are telling you to do things. Why shouldn't we hold them to that standard? Why should we excuse like massive amounts of corruption and be like, oh, it's just Africa, it's okay, it's just a goofy thing they do? And like in Latin America, where you just have countries that are run as narco states, and it's just kind of excused. Like you'll be from a country where if a politician like accepts a bottle of wine from a constituent in exchange for helping him to get a permit, that is beyond the pale. But if in a country you have someone who like has political opponents whacked, who takes bribes from drug cartels, that's fine. So it's something that we've just never really been able to deal with, and it's led to this very bipolar, this very schizophrenic way of looking at things, and this is a really good example of that. And I know that was kind of a long preamble, but I think this really kind of covers the whole, we have no idea whatsoever how to deal with the third world or the developing world, and they kind of want it both ways. They want this whole, like if you read Guns, Germs, and Steel, when I tried to read that, I got 2 pages in and I threw the book across the room, because he said like the most superior people on earth were the Papua New Guineans because there's like 30,000 languages and like 100,000 people or something like that. I'm like, well, that's not, how is that sophisticated? They never discovered like fire. Why is that superior? So like, so we're supposed to be like, oh, the Africans or whoever are superior. So then why did they get their asses kicked and they get colonized? It's like that scene in Train Spotting. I don't hate the English, they're wankers, but we got colonized by wankers. So they don't know how to deal with it. So let's get into China. Empire of debt. China colonizing smaller countries by lending them massive amounts of money they can never repay in a bid for world domination. So here is what I'm getting into. Okay, so they're colonizing countries by lending them money. Now, I don't know how loans work. I've taken out a couple in my life, but I remember when I took out a student loan, they gave me the money, and they said, okay, you got to repay this after you're done school. And if you don't repay it within a year of being done school, you'll start to have to pay interest on it. And I said, okay. And there was like a form I had to sign with the terms and conditions on it that said, I agree to abide by this. But I guess the loans don't work like that. I guess the countries in question don't go and ask for the loan. And then they negotiate with China and they come to mutually agreed upon conditions and then they both agree to them. And if these countries are a democracy, the people that the popularly elected legitimate government signs this agreement. So I guess that doesn't happen. I guess China just like invades their country, is like, here, take this loan, and they're like, okay, we're gonna take this loan. And this is back to what I was saying. Like, they're treating these countries like they have no agency. Like they're run by children. Like, oh, the Africans are so superior. Oh, but they got scammed. They got scammed into taking money from China, which, like, to be fair, I mean, let's assume that the money China is lending them came from legitimate sources. Let's assume it was, they made it off of tax, out of trading low quality but still barely legally passable merchandise with America. The Chinese government made the $600 million or whatever and then loaned it out. That is money that China made. That's money that tens of millions of Chinese people, it represents their labor. If you're taking that money from China, you're borrowing all those people time and labor. And the idea that that means nothing is just always kind of bothered me. It's like, it doesn't really matter if it's a country. The country's money, the state's money is ultimately just like a collective, the collective finances of the people. So when China lends a country like $100 billion, what they're doing is they're lending the country $100 billion of the Chinese people's money. And if they don't pay that money back, they're stealing from the Chinese people. I mean, they are. I don't know like how else to describe it. Like, we can say, oh, the rich are bad, oh, that kind of thing. But at the end of the day, if you borrow money from somebody, and this is assuming you have a choice, because like with student loans in the U.S., people don't really. We'll get into that some other time. There's lots of times in life where you don't have a choice, and that's a completely different situation. But when you borrow money from somebody with no intention of ever paying it back, that's stealing. That's stealing from the Chinese government. That's stealing from the Chinese people. That's stealing the labor that went into producing that money. So sorry, I know we haven't really gotten into this article yet, but let's see here. Defaulters have, and so we're supposed to say, oh, these countries, they're run by like superior forms of government, like with restorative justice and truth and reconciliation. But we can't hold them to the agreements that they legally signed. We can't do like that would be crazy. Defaulters have been pressured into surrendering assets and territory or allowing military bases on their land. Like, honestly, from a moral standpoint, I don't really get what the issue is with it. Okay, you borrowed money, you didn't pay the money back. They have a right to take compensation. I mean, like, this is China we're talking about. I've done like 200 China economy strongs about what kind of a society China is. This stuff is publicly available. Like, I don't know. It doesn't make any sense. China is colonizing smaller countries by lending them massive amounts of money they can never repay, it's being claimed. Like, once again, how is this China's fault? Like it's China's fault that stupid people take out loans they can't afford and that they can't pay them back. So like once again, are we supposed to treat these people like children? Are we supposed to just say, oh, the people in these countries are little kids. They can't agree to binding contracts. They don't have the moral agency to do that. And I mean, that is a legitimate point of view. Like, I'm okay if you want to think that, but you have to try to be a little consistent on this, because otherwise it just doesn't make a lot of sense. So it's like, okay, so all these countries, Montenegro, Papua New Guinea, which Jared Diamond calls the greatest country that's ever lived, Pakistan, Maldives, Some of these countries are democratic. I think Maldives is democratic. Montenegro is certainly a democratic country. Pakistan is, I don't even know how to define Pakistan. I think it's democratic at the moment. It goes back and forth. But my point is, there is a popularly elected government that is internationally recognized who entered into this treaty. Developing countries from Pakistan to Djibouti, the Maldives to Fiji all owe huge amounts to China. Already there are examples of defaulters being pressured into surrendering control of assets or allowing military bases on their land. Yeah, because they didn't pay them back. Like, what did they think was going to happen? Oh, we're just going to take money from China and they're going to be okay with us not giving them anything in return. That's not how life works. This isn't UNICEF. This isn't like Live Strong. This isn't like the AIDS wristbands. Some are calling it debt trap diplomacy or debt colonialism, offering enticing loans to countries unable to repay and then demanding concessions when they default. Okay. I still don't get what's immoral about this. Owing more than $1 billion in debts to China, Sri Lanka government handed over a port to companies owned by the Chinese government on a 99-year lease. What is actually immoral about that? Sri Lanka needed, because sometimes it's okay to trade things. Like, let's say you're an African country, you don't have roads, you don't have running water, you don't have electricity, you do have oil, but you have no means to extract the oil. So the Chinese come to you, and this is what they've done. They'll say, okay, so we'll build you power plants, we'll build you water treatment facilities, we'll build you roads and railways, and give us the oil. And is that really an unfair deal? That oil might be worth more, theoretically, than all the stuff they're giving you, but the oil isn't doing them any good. Whereas if they give it to China, they'll get all this other stuff, like that'll actually help their economy. Maybe they'll use that $1 billion to invest in education or something. And maybe that port is a good deal. Now, do I think this is the case? No, I think it's just corrupt people lining their own pockets. But I can definitely see situations in which mortgaging or selling some things for money that you can invest in infrastructure, education, or healthcare, that kind of thing, would make sense. Generally speaking, I think it's a better bet to develop your people than to develop your natural resources. To me, and this is just kind of my personal view, if you have oil, if you have diamonds, if you have gold or whatever, the money from that should be used to build first-rate infrastructure and to invest in education and technology and to invest in things that don't require you to dig stuff up out of the ground. That's just my view. And then the most successful country in Africa, Botswana, that's largely what they did with their diamonds, but I digress. And Djibouti, home to the U.S.'s main military base in Africa, also looks likely to cede control of a port terminal to a Beijing-linked firm. It's like China's not allowed to buy stuff. America is eager to stop. Okay, let's see here. Last March, ex-Secretary of State Rex Tillerson said Beijing encouraged dependency using opaque contracts, predatory loan practices, and corrupt deals that mire nations in debt and undercut their sovereignty. That sounds like something the U.S. does a lot. It sounds like, yeah. That also sounds like something every country does. So now we're just showing pictures of the Chinese army for like no reason. I don't know how that's even relevant. Let's see here. It shows how infrastructure project loans to the likes of Mongolia, Montenegro, and Lagos have resulted in millions or even billions in debts, which often account for huge percentages of the country's GDP. So, these countries, they're like, okay, so this loan is for 100% of our GDP, and there's like a 20% interest rate. This is a great deal. We're going to sign it. Like, how is this China's fault? If you're going to say these people are children and they have no agency and you can't lend them money because they're completely irresponsible, I'm sympathetic to that. I largely agree with that. A lot of these countries are like complete and utter like failed states or disaster zones with like a corrupt culture, a corrupt people, a corrupt government. So I'm okay with that, but you have to You can't have it both ways. Many of these projects are linked to the Belt and Road Initiative, a bold project to create trade routes through huge swaths of Eurasia, with China at the center. Let's see here. Participating countries often undertake work on roads and ports with part funding from China. Okay, so they're getting something out of it. Like I said, maybe trading that port to get the infrastructure is actually a pretty good deal. More recently, China's debt empire has been rearing its head in the Pacific, prompting fears the country intends to leverage the debt to expand its military footprint in the South Pacific. Okay. You know what it is, and this is something I respect about China. The Chinese government says we are a state, and the China state exists to serve the China people. It doesn't exist for any other reason. None of this like save the whales, feed the children, one world, let's all hold hands crap. We exist to get the best deal for the China people. And if that means we give out loans to countries that we know are completely inept and that they're not going to repay, that's fine because we're going to get stuff for China. And I think part of this, and I'm not saying I want us to act like that. That's not what I'm saying. I don't want us to be like amoral, like sociopaths. But I'm saying China is acting in their rational self-interest. And I have a lot of respect for that. That they're not like Europe or North America or whatever, who's just going to lie over and let themselves be destroyed in any number of ways out of some desire to appear virtuous. The Chinese government doesn't give a shit. They're just like, okay, we're going to take these resources to make China stronger. And I wish we had governments that had like just a bit of that even. Yeah, so they're building all these bases on the Spratly Islands. China made these intentions more obvious, approaching Vanuatu about setting up a military base. Australia expressed alarm at this move. Vanuatu owes 191 million pounds to China, according to one think tank. And they're building this giant thing. And then that's the laser AK-47, which doesn't exist and is complete bullshit. And this isn't like some like average person, by the way, who took out a mortgage and there was a small printer, they got screwed over. These are like people with bureaucracies who have thousands of experts in law and finance and international trade who all collectively approved this thing. It's not like Bill and Jane who took out a loan because they got scammed and they hadn't realized, or like the pension funds and yeah. Let's see here. They want loan write-offs. It's become a serious issue. We have debt distress. Poa said China debt becoming so prolific, it was no longer a problem to deal with individually. He added, I think these small countries will eventually come together to find a way out. Well, then why did they take the loans? Like, I'm sorry I'm a broken record here, but I don't really like get what China's doing wrong here. I mean, in kind of a... Okay, trying to defend its lending practice, saying they were sincere and unselfish, and insisting it only lent to countries that could repay. Let's see here. Now, is China doing this to screw people? Yeah, they are. But at the same time, my point is, on what grounds are we objecting to this? If we're going to say that these, like I said, that these countries are people who, they don't have agency, they're just not bright enough to come up with this, and they're taking advantage of it. Kind of like picking on the retarded kid and making him believe stuff. Then that's fine. I agree with that. But if we're gonna say that these countries are like not only equal but superior to us culturally, genetically, and morally, then we have to accept these are just the decisions they made, and they have to live with them. And it's not fair to China and to the Chinese people to say, sorry guys, we know you entered into a legally binding agreement, but you can't hold them to this agreement because that would be mean. Anyways, that's my thoughts on the matter. I hope it was an interesting topic. This is Argent. We must ascend.